I don't care how many towers he owns. If he doesn't pay, we'll take them brick by brick. The words hung in the air, not whispered behind closed doors, not buried in a classified memo, not redacted in some obscure court transcript. Attorney General Letitia James delivered them with surgical precision, each syllable a calculated strike. She stood flanked by the New York State SEAL, cameras converging like predators sensing blood in the water. This wasn't a press conference. It was an execution, financial, political, deeply personal. I am not afraid of Donald Trump, she declared, gripping the podium as though it were the throat of justice itself. If he can't pay what the court has ruled, we will seize what's his, every property, every holding. Her eyes narrowed, voice dropping to a near whisper that somehow filled the entire room. Justice doesn't wait for billionaires. The press corps erupted as though they'd witnessed a championship knockout. MSNBC cut straight to commercial, their chyron blazing, fearless AG takes on Trump's empire, They treated her words like gospel, as if she'd just delivered the Sermon on the Mount with subpoenas instead of scripture. But across town, in a secure room beneath Capitol Hill, where the fluorescent lights cast everything in the harsh glow of truth, Kash Patel watched the spectacle unfold, with the detached calm of a chess master who'd seen his opponent's fatal move before they'd even considered it. He wasn't dazzled, he wasn't impressed, and he wasn't about to let the country swallow a lie dressed in press conference couture. Without a word, he reached into a manila folder labeled Power of Attorney, Norfolk Property, August 2023. Inside lay a document bearing her signature, Letitia James declaring Virginia, not New York, as her primary residence. If true, it rendered her legally ineligible to serve as New York's Attorney General. If false, it was mortgage fraud. Either way, it wasn't just a paperwork problem anymore. It was a credibility detonation, and Patel held the match. She talks about justice not waiting for billionaires, he muttered, sliding the folder across the polished desk. That's cute, but justice also doesn't wait for hypocrites with a microphone. This wasn't red versus blue, it was truth versus branding, and Letitia James had just picked the wrong week to turn legal vendetta into political theater. Kash Patel didn't respond with a press conference or a hashtag. He didn't storm cable news with righteous indignation or hire a PR firm to inflate his moral posture. He did something far more dangerous. He read the paperwork, no fiery monologue, no pre-written soundbite for the media cycle, just a calm appearance on a conservative talk show, seated comfortably, with a stack of documents thicker than a DNC diversity report. And then, with the grace of a man who had already done his homework, he dropped the bomb. Here's the power of attorney signed by Letitia James, dated August 17, 2023, stating under penalty of perjury that her primary residence is in Norfolk, Virginia. The host blinked, the audience froze, and the political firewall that had protected Letitia for years began to smoke. Because when the woman who crusades against real estate fraud claims she lives in a different state just to score a better mortgage, well, that's not a clerical error. That's a credibility implosion with a mortgage clause attached. Twitter ignited instantly. Breaking, Letitia James declared Virginia her primary residence while serving as Attorney General of New York. Hash, Letty allied hash, Trump complied bud, bick, by brick. More like signature by signature. It wasn't even the hypocrisy that cut deepest. It was the symmetry, the eerie, poetic symmetry of it all. She had dragged Trump through the mud for allegedly inflating property values, while she had been inflating her own residential status to secure better loan terms. Kash didn't gloat. He didn't yell. He simply leaned back, tapped the folder, and said with deadly precision, there are only two possibilities here. Either she committed mortgage fraud, or she forfeited her legal residency in New York, which makes her ineligible to be the state's Attorney General. He let that land. That's not politics, that's statute. And for the first time in months, Letitia James wasn't the one holding the gavel. She was under it. By the time the House Oversight Committee convened that Thursday morning, the story had metastasized into a political wildfire. What began as a whisper of hypocrisy had exploded into a full-blown legal paradox, and no one wanted to be caught holding the matches. The hearing room, normally a sterile space for grandstanding and pre-scripted outrage, had transformed into something far more volatile, a room where both sides were visibly uncertain about where the ground even was. Letitia James entered first, poised in power lawyer crimson. Her confidence wasn't just performative, it was weaponized. Two Democratic representatives flanked her like bouncers at a press-only nightclub, nodding and ensuring the cameras caught every inch of moral superiority they could muster. And then came Kash Patel. No entourage, no opening remarks, no theatrics, just a man in a navy suit carrying a leather briefcase that held more credibility than half the room combined. He didn't shake hands, he didn't scan the room for allies. He simply sat down and slid a hard copy of the document across the table, like he was revealing a royal flush in a high-stakes poker game. The room fell so silent you could hear the false moral equilibrium cracking. The chairman, an independent with a hawkish disdain for both corruption and press releases, leaned into the microphone. Let's be clear, today isn't about whether Donald Trump inflated real estate valuations in a city where Starbucks does it daily. This hearing isn't about politics, it's about precedent, about the rule of law, and whether the person enforcing it is still subject to it. Letitia tilted her head. A practiced smile danced at the edge of her lips, one she likely reserved for donors and bad photo ops. Her supporters behind her gave the sort of nod that says, "She's got this." But deep down, even they knew the air had changed. Because the problem with living in a moral ivory tower is that one wrong document can turn it into a glass house. And Letitia hadn't just brought the blueprint, she had signed it. Kash didn't speak. He didn't need to. The papers in front of him said enough. The residence declaration, the mortgage clause, the date, the signature, all of it was sitting there, daring anyone to pretend it didn't exist. The chairman exhaled sharply. The question isn't whether Miss James made a clerical error. The question is whether the sort of justice she wields has a blade on both sides. And with that, the stage was set, not for a political defense, but for a legal reckoning. One that would test not just the credibility of an attorney general, but the very definition of justice in a two-tiered system. But if there's one thing modern politicians have mastered better than legal nuance, it's weaponized identity. Letitia took a deep breath. The room hushed, expectant. And then, with the timing of a Broadway veteran and the tone of a Sunday sermon, she began, "I stand here not just as an attorney general, but as the daughter of a stone of hope." A pause, a well-practiced pause. "I fight not for billionaires or headlines, but for the children who can't afford insulin, for the parents working 3 jobs just to pay rent, for every woman of color told she's too loud in a room full of silence." Somewhere in the gallery, a staffer dabbed at the corner of their eye like they'd just seen Hamilton for the first time. 2 Democratic representatives nodded so aggressively, it looked like a choreographed TikTok duet. Letitia continued, transitioning effortlessly into her favorite acronym DEE, diversity, equity, inclusion, a political Swiss Army knife, ready to carve any criticism into a hate crime. "When they come for me," she said, eyes gleaming with conviction, "they're not just coming after Letitia James, they're coming after every marginalized voice that dared rise up." Translation, asterisk. Please ignore the mortgage fraud because, oppression. The media lapped it up. A viral clip was born before she even reached the 3rd syllable of intersectional. CNN looped the quote. MSNBC ran a lower third graphic that read asterisk, "Stone of Hope faces storm of hate asterisk." But while the left clutched their pearls and rehearsed think pieces about how bravery looks in a red blazer, Kash Patel sat in stone silence. No response, no smirk. Just one hand slowly reaching toward the panel's touchscreen. He tapped once. The display behind him lit up. One simple slide. Asterisk. Letitia A. James. August 17th, 2023. Principal residence. Virginia asterisk. No commentary. No theatrics. Just facts and fonts. For a split second, even the MSNBC camera feed hesitated, because somewhere deep inside the collective lizard brain of cable news, a disturbing realization sparked, asterisk, "We just aired a woman invoking Dr. King to cover a potential felony." Asterisk Letitia stared at the glowing slide behind her like it had just betrayed her in public. Because it had. And just when she began recalibrating her next poetic deflection, Kash Patel leaned forward. His voice was low, unhurried, and infinitely more lethal than shouting. I want to walk everyone through this carefully, since clarity, not charisma, is what this room was allegedly built for. He opened the folder, not a binder, not a digital slideshow, just a manila folder, unbranded and devastating. This is the Power of Attorney document signed August 17, 2023, by Letitia Ann James. Not a copy, not a paraphrase. Her words, her ink. He traced his finger down the page methodically. Page 1. She designates Norfolk, Virginia as her principal residence. Not temporary address. Not property under investment. Asterisk principal residence. Page 2. Purpose of transaction. Primary mortgage. To be granted under residency-based loan incentives. Terms contingent on principal residence. Page 3. Signature. Bottom right corner. In cursive, bold, proud. He held it up, not for dramatics, but because receipts deserve sunlight. Now I know principal residence might sound like legal poetry to some in this room. So I brought the IRS definition, just in case we've mistaken activism for comprehension. The monitors flickered. New slide. IRS definition. Asterisk principal residence. Your main home. The place where you reside most of the time. It's not a feeling. It's not a vibe. It's a federally recognized status. And you can't have two of them unless your name is Schrodinger. Asterisk a few chuckles, mostly from staffers pretending not to laugh. Letitia stiffened, but Kash kept going. So here are the two scenarios we're left with. 1. Miss James was telling the truth on this form, which would mean she doesn't reside in New York, and therefore is ineligible to serve as Attorney General under New York state law. Or 2. She lied to obtain better mortgage terms. That's called mortgage fraud. He let that sink in. Either way, this isn't about red states or blue. This is about black and white. Ink and law. Not poetry and applause. He didn't raise his voice once. He didn't need to. The room had gone cold. Democratic representatives sat motionless. Their silence wasn't strategic. It was involuntary. The same mouths that had cheered Stone of Hope just minutes ago were now tight, teeth clenched behind the kind of smiles that usually follow audit letters. Kash slid the folder across the table. And let me say this gently. If anyone in this room wants to challenge the authenticity of these documents, I'll gladly yield my time. But if no one does, we should all stop pretending this is about political persecution. It's about whether the enforcer of the law thinks she's exempt from it. The file sat at the center of the table like a dead truth. No one wanted to claim. And for the first time, Letitia didn't look like a warrior. She looked like a defendant without a podium. But politicians, like cornered animals, are at their most feral when the applause stops. Letitia straightened her blazer. The red one CNN had dubbed battle-ready crimson. Her voice returned not with vulnerability, but venom. Let's be very clear, she said, locking eyes with Patel. Kash Patel is not here to defend the Constitution. He is here on behalf of one man. A man who has spent his career dodging subpoenas and rewriting truth with tweets. This is not about law. This is about loyalty. She didn't wait for a reaction. She didn't need one, because the next line was aimed directly at the jugular. This is the same Kash Patel who was under scrutiny in the Russia investigation. The same man who played errand boy to a president, desperate to discredit intelligence agencies and manipulate DOJ priorities for personal gain. And now he wants to stand here and lecture me on ethics, the crowd murmured. A low ripple of strategic indignation moved across the Democratic side of the room. One representative, clearly auditioning for a future MSNBC contract, jumped in, voice amplified by righteous fervor.
Oh, Mr.
Chairman, I must ask, are we really allowing a man removed from national security roles, sidelined by multiple administrations, to publicly question a duly elected attorney general? This isn't oversight. This is vendetta theater. The tone of the room shifted, but only slightly, because for all the fire Letitia brought, there was one thing she couldn't set ablaze. The documents on the table. Kash, still seated, didn't flinch. He didn't reach for the mic. He simply waited. And when the silence lingered, just long enough to become awkward, He delivered the kill line with surgical softness. "Madam Attorney General," he said, voice calm, even courteous. "I'm not here to prosecute you. Your signature already did that. I'm just here to make sure the country doesn't pretend it didn't happen." Letitia James sat in silence, but it wasn't the dignified kind. It was the kind of silence that comes right after your own pen writes you out of power, and someone else starts reading it aloud. Kash Patel didn't smirk. He didn't look victorious. He looked surgical, and what he was about to do would slice deeper than any headline ever could. He clicked once. The monitor behind him changed. Not to a speech, not to an opinion, but to a calendar. "Let's talk dates," he said, his voice dry, sharp and soaked in irony. "August 17th, 2023. That's when Letitia James signed a sworn mortgage document, declaring her principal residence as Norfolk, Virginia. Same day she filed a $455 million lawsuit against Donald J. Trump as the Attorney General of New York." He paused, letting the math hit before the law did. Same day, same name, same signature. Two legal actions, but under New York law, only one legal identity. The room didn't gasp, it groaned, because this wasn't a contradiction. It was a collision between signature and statute. Kash leaned in slightly, his voice softer now, almost merciful, almost. "New York Public Officers Law, Section 30, Subsection 1. An office shall be deemed vacant upon the officer ceasing to be an inhabitant of the state from which they were elected or appointed." It doesn't say maybe. It doesn't say unless it's for a good interest rate. It says you're out. A quiet, scathing clarity cut across the room. But Kash wasn't done. "So let me ask this body a very simple question. If on August 17th, Miss James legally declared herself a resident of Virginia, does that mean the very day she sued Donald Trump, she had no legal authority to sue anyone at all?" A beat, and then the voice of a congressman, not known for drama but for law, broke the air like a gavel. "Mr. Patel, are you suggesting that the entire Trump lawsuit is legally void?" Kash didn't blink. "I didn't strip her authority. She surrendered it, on paper, in ink, with full intent." Asterisk boom. Asterisk, no shouting, no moral grandstanding, just ink, date, and a law that didn't care how many press conferences came before it. Letitia didn't interrupt, because there was nothing to interrupt except herself. She had loaded the gun, cocked it, and pulled the trigger, only to realize the barrel was facing her own office. The gavel came down again, not for order, not for drama, but as a funeral bell tolling for a lawsuit that had signed its own death certificate. Con, one for is in no. And just when it seemed Letitia might reclaim oxygen in the room, a voice rose, not from across the aisle, but from behind her. The betrayal didn't come from Republicans. It came from a Democrat, one who'd endorsed her in speeches, fundraisers, and op-eds titled, "Why Letitia James is What Justice Looks Like." He didn't shout, he didn't stand, he just leaned toward the mic and fired like a man who'd had enough. "Madam Attorney General," he began, measured but deliberate. "Supported your campaign because I believed in equal justice. I didn't vote for you to weaponize your office to seize someone's home, while you sign mortgage forms to buy yours on false terms. This isn't what we campaigned for. This isn't what we marched for. This is what we resigned from when other parties did it." The words weren't scathing. They were worse. They were disappointed. Letitia turned slightly, but no one reached for her mic. No allies stepped in, no prepared interjection, only a ripple, silent and seismic, moving through her own bench. She opened her mouth finally, desperate to find footing where there was none. "Congressman, with respect, this hearing is being hijacked by those who never accepted the verdict against Mr. Trump. This is coordinated backlash, not oversight. We should be focusing on systemic abuse, not weaponizing paperwork." But the oxygen was gone, and the silence in the chamber wasn't deference, it was abandonment. One Democratic aide, seated behind the second row, didn't even try to whisper. She lost the room, and the caucus. The cameras didn't catch Letitia's expression, but they didn't need to, because the only thing more revealing than a collapse on live TV is the moment your own side stops clapping. Letitia hadn't just lost her base. She'd lost her buffer. Kash knew it, and he wasn't about to let the moment cool.
He tapped his folder again.
Casually, like a chef reaching for one last ingredient that would ruin the whole recipe. Since we're already talking about forms, he began, his voice measured but laced with precision. Let's take a look at the Norfolk property filings submitted by Miss James in 2022 and 2023.
He tapped another click.
On the screen appeared two nearly identical documents. Same property, same address, different numbers. On this declaration, he said, pointing, she listed the building as having 5 units. On this one, filed the following year, she declared 4. Same property, same ownership, different unit count. He paused, not for drama, but for digestion. Now I know what some might say, that's just a clerical error. A box checked wrong, a detail overlooked. But let me remind this committee of the foundation of her case against Donald Trump. Inconsistent asset declarations, intended to manipulate property valuations. Word for word, he turned to face her, not with malice, but with that dreadful kind of certainty that only paperwork can deliver. So I ask if this was enough to drag a former president through a courtroom for a year. Shouldn't it be enough to walk a current attorney general out of this room? You could hear it land.
Not a thud, not a bang, a verdict.
Unspoken, but irreversible. Letitia didn't respond.
She didn't need to.
Her silence wasn't protective anymore. It was surrender, dressed as restraint. Kash didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult. He just held up the 2 documents again.
5, 4, 1 too many.
Or one lie too deep. Behind Letitia, a laptop clicked shut, more like punctuation than panic. A folder folded with deliberate calm. No one was watching her anymore. Attention had quietly withdrawn, tucked behind the polite theater of paperwork and posture. The aides who once nodded along now sat motionless, silent as stone. Letitia reached for the mic, not out of hope. It was pure reflex, an echo from a time when closing remarks earned standing ovations, not silence. Before this session concludes, she began, voice grazing the edge of memory, I'd like to reiterate my unwavering commitment to justice. Every action I've taken in office has been in the service of the people, for the truth. The sound cut out mid-sentence. With one finger tap, the chairman had ended it. Attorney General James, he said, calm and precise. The record speaks clearly. What remains is out of your hands now. No one raised an objection. No one shifted to request time. The air had stiffened, as if a collective conclusion had been reached long before those words were spoken. Her hand lowered, gracefully, though stripped of momentum. It was a movement born from years of applause, now suspended midair with nowhere to land. I've spent years defending the law, defending faith in our systems, she said softly. I never imagined leaving this room without hearing a single word of recognition. Nothing followed, just the rustle of papers, a camera lens adjusting, a pen rolling across a folder. She gathered her notes with practiced care. The face remained composed, but the stature had dimmed. Her walk toward the exit was steady, yet every step felt like a curtain falling backstage after the audience had already left. The cameras moved across the dais. No heads turned. No eyes tracked her departure. Most were fixed squarely on tablets, screens, or the nearest safe distraction. What the lens captured wasn't outrage. It was something worse. Resignation, crossed arms, glazed stares, that unspoken understanding among professionals. The decision had already been made. Moments later, a tweet appeared. Asterisk stone of hope, just turned into paperwork of hypocrisy. Asterisk no tags, no party affiliation, no hashtags. It didn't need amplification. Some truths move faster than spin. As the door clicked shut behind her, a young aide remained, gathering the rest of the documents. No one had asked them to. They just did it out of rhythm, or maybe out of habit. One whisper followed, quiet and unclaimed. No one pushed her down. They just stopped watching. A lone staffer folded the last page into a manila file, exhaling like he was sealing away the final breath of a political era. No statements, no ceremony, just a quiet vacuum that somehow said everything. At the center table, the chairman picked up a sheet. It didn't drop like a gavel. It arrived exactly when it needed to. Per Section 32 of this committee's procedural code, he read without pause, We are forwarding the full record of these proceedings to the Office of the New York Attorney General Oversight Division and the Department of Justice to evaluate possible mortgage fraud and assess violations of eligibility statutes related to public office residency requirements. No dramatics followed. Please, this wasn't theater. The curtain had already closed when Letitia stepped out of frame. No one asked for an encore. #SEP Kash Patel remained silent, eyes steady. He didn't need to speak. Sometimes a man's presence becomes the punctuation to a document already signed. The chairman lifted his gaze again, voice stripped of rhetoric, stripped of pretense. New York state law leaves no room for creative interpretation. Any individual residing outside the jurisdiction of New York shall be ineligible to hold public office. This isn't about opinion, it's about location. Below him, staffers typed like stenographers of judgment, turning silence into record. A journalist stood. Her question was the scalpel everyone expected, but no one had reached for yet. Chairman, does this mean Letitia James is no longer the Attorney General of New York? A glance was exchanged with legal counsel. Nothing was said. Nothing needed to be. No one offered defense. No voice filled the void. And somehow that was louder than any answer. Her nameplate was never moved. It sat there like a relic from a fallen empire. No longer a badge of office, just a placeholder for what once felt untouchable. The hearing was over. The judgment had shifted from verbal to visual, from noise to absence. Letitia was gone, and no one asked when she'd return. Kash Patel walked through the corridor slowly, not as a man leaving a battlefield, but as someone who had simply turned on the lights and watched the termites scatter. Reporters swarmed, flashes flared, but he didn't flinch. He had already said everything without saying anything, until a pause near the exit. One moment, one breath, one witness, a young aide beside him, quiet but wide-eyed, holding the last binder with Letitia's initials on the spine. Kash looked ahead, then down, just enough to be heard, never loud enough to be performative. Funny, isn't it? He murmured. They said she was fearless, said she stared down Trump. But in the end all it took to shake her was a line of ink beside her own name. He left the rest hanging, because anything more would have been indulgent. And that silence, that loaded stillness was louder than any press release ever drafted. The cameras didn't get a soundbite. They captured something far rarer, a collapse without collision. Across newsrooms, the final chyron wrote itself asterisk. Letitia James caught committing fraud asterisk. And history didn't argue. No objections, no rewrites, just a verdict made permanent by the fact that no one tried to soften it. Later that night, a single tweet rose above the noise. Simple, stark, surgical, find. Turns out she wasn't afraid of Trump. She was afraid of paper. That line wasn't trending. It was canonized. And so the case closed itself, not by force, not by fire, but by the weight of her own documentation. A fall from power so precise you could trace it in her handwriting.